Voltage present in brand new fiberglass pool. Good morning, pool peeps. Hope you're both well. Well, thank you, other pool person. We are new pool owners with what we consider a serious problem. The pool installation was completed in February of 23. Needless to say, this is our first season with the pool. Upon initial use, we noticed a rather unpleasant feeling when touching the wet concrete from in the pool. Checked voltage, and there's 0.900 VAC on the house side and 1.6 VAC on the back side facing the woods. I informed the pool company, but I also wanted to get the city involved due to a wire relocation that took place prior to the install. It was weird since the voltage increase was much closer to the tap location behind the pool. I hoped one of the taps was bad and voltage was leaching. I went ahead and killed the disconnect at the main, and the voltage was still present. First round of city electrical, pulled the meter, checked for a neutral issue, all good, no problem. At the transformer, killed the two hot legs and voltage still present. Killed the neutral and bingo, the voltage goes away. They went ahead and changed the transformer, added additional ground rods at the transformer, and still voltage present. Found some stray voltage backfeeding from some cable providers in my neighbors' houses, but after isolating those, voltage still present. They even checked several transformers in my community to verify no issue, and they found no issues. These guys even tested running new wires direct from the transformer to the house to verify the slices weren't compromised and the voltage was still present. The city head guy made a comment about the water not being bonded. The second round was the pool company electrician. The guy told me the water is bonded along with the pump and the heater. However, he mentioned the concrete not being bonded. These guys don't use rebar nor a bonding grid, just a wire. There's 8 feet of concrete on 3 sides with 20 feet of patio running to the house. The steel handrail that doesn't extend into the water shows 0 voltage. The pool is fiberglass, salt water, and heater. Super concerned about needing to rip up and redo the concrete and wanted to get some input from a fresh perspective. I did watch your episode about a relatively identical scenario, but I wanted to add some additional detail. Thanks in advance.
Okay, so there's a lot of things to kind of unpack in this one. While those electrical charges that you're sensing could be from local feeds, meaning your local transformer and your local feed to your house, it doesn't mean that they are. Electricity is leaching into the ground everywhere, and depending on the channel, think about the soil. Some's more conductive than others. Think about all the ways that it could get there. However, knowing all of that, my thought would go back to the bonding as well. Oh, I don't know where you are in the country, if you are in the country, but the U.S. code requires a bonding equipotential grid around the pool. And here's why. There are 2 different stories that I've been told through many inspectors over the years asking the question, why the equipotential grid, when in past years it was perfectly fine just to run a bond wire around the pool and hit all the metal spots and it would be fine. And all of a sudden this new code comes up 20 years ago saying, oh, we have to have this equipotential grid. So there's 2 different stories that I've heard. I can't verify one or the other, but I'm going to tell you both of them because maybe they're relevant, maybe they're not. I've had several inspectors say, well, the reason that this new code came into effect with the equipotential grid is because during the Katrina catastrophe hurricane down in Louisiana, electrical charge was noticed in the wet concrete due to all of the flooding. And as a result, the officials recognized that the concrete itself had the chance to conduct electricity, and therefore we needed a way to be able to safely drain the electrical charge out of the concrete. One story. Second story I've heard through many inspectors is that there was a farmer, that farmer guy, there was a farmer that when it was raining, his cows would not come into the barn to feed. There was a lean-to off the back of the barn, lean-to where they put the hay, but there was a concrete floor there. And the cows, when the ground was wet, would not come in to feed, and he couldn't figure out why. And as it turned out, when their hoofs were wet and they stepped on the concrete, they were getting shocked. And those shocks were enough to, much like you're recognizing there's this thing happening and it's uncomfortable. Now, is it enough voltage to really cause you damage physically? No, but it's uncomfortable and it shouldn't be there. So that was the other story, was obviously this concrete is able to conduct electricity, or something's going on in there. We need the ability to drain off that random electrical. Hence, whether either one of those stories is true, no idea. However, the result of what may or may not allegedly have been these stories is the electrical code around a swimming pool requires an equipotential grid around the pool. Now, one could argue that it shouldn't add or take away from just having a bond wire laying around the pool. However, it does, and it can make a difference. And as you referenced the video where I talk specifically about having a steel wall vinyl liner pool, where when the electrician ran the electrical, he made sure he hit it in the enough places, but there was a section of the steel that was isolated because of two separate fiberglass steps, a deep and a shallow end step, and as a result of that, the homeowner was getting shocked. And what people don't realize is the electricity is trying to jump into the pool, not out of the pool. So we have an electrically charged in the ground, and it's jumping over into the water. My thoughts would be that while you may have a bond at the water, so I would imagine and would hope, as a bare minimum, you started with making sure that you had a sacrificial anode in the system, a zinc anode, to be able to draw some of that electrical off of the charge. Because when you realize a salt pool conducts electricity, because there's enough salt dissolved in the water that it makes the water conduct electricity. Water by itself, pure water, has no ability to conduct electricity, but once you dissolve salts in the water, it has that ability to conduct. So
alternatively to pulling up the patio, they could switch from salt water to chlorine feeder. Maybe.
They could. That it doesn't solve the problem, it just makes it less noticeable. So it's still there, and I think ultimately, I wouldn't not want to go from salt to not salt. I mean, ultimately, you get used to that system, and I wouldn't want to replace it and go back to using standard chlorine. I think though that you might want to look at all of the possible ways that you could bond around the pool. You may even look back, and now this is going to take us down a little bit more of another rabbit hole. This is a baby goat, by the way. If the township, or who the city inspectors or installers or whoever, added additional grounding rods to the ground at the transformer, which I'm assuming is at the property line or somewhere, that may have complicated the problem instead of solved the problem. And I'm in no way an expert on this, other than I've been around a lot of really smart people who have explained how and why to do things. And one of the things that I can remember from a very accomplished, very well-known electrical guy who helped write the code in a seminar that I was at, he talked very specifically about not having a separate grounding rod that would be attached to the pool, go back to the house. And while he's no longer with us, so we can't ask him why the reason, I do remember that. So I've kind of kept that as a rule of thumb. By them adding grounding rods at the transformer, I don't know if that helps or complicates the system. Just kind of throwing it out there. But I would certainly look at what it would take to bond around the pool. If there's any photographs, it's a brand new pool. If there's any photographs of that bond wire, make sure it's continuous. Make sure that it didn't get poured in the concrete, and when they were saw cutting the concrete patio, it didn't get cut through. There's any number of reasons, and I'm gonna kind of go out on a limb after this long explanation that likely you have a severed bond wire somewhere and it's not bonding the patio. If there's any way to do that, that's what I would recommend you doing.